Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to a brand new one. Now, pretty excited to talk about this one because if you are a DevOps engineer or a fresher or somebody transitioning from developer or tester or security role to DevOps, this and especially for AWS, this is the right video for you because I've been working on Azure from past many years. Now, past 8-9 months, I started working on AWS, and I wanted to show you because there are more than 200 resources in AWS, and it's pretty easy to get kind of lost into all of those plethora of services. You've got so many services. Which one do you get started to learn? So in this one, I'm going to pave the path for you. I'm going to tell you which all services. There's going to be 5 to 6 services. It's going to be very impromptu. Not planned anything, but what I've done is I've condensed down my 8-9 years of experience of cloud plus 8-9 months of experience of AWS into this one. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first service which you should be really try to understand is this is the authorization and authentication. Any cloud provider, be it Azure, AWS, in this case, authorization and authentication is the first thing you learn. So first thing in the bucket is authentication and authorization. You're going to be getting started with how IAM works into AWS. How do you authenticate? How do you log into AWS? Whether it's UI, whether using the access key and access secret key, whether you log in via API address, whether you use a user ID or assume a role. Now, role is like you create a bunch of roles into AWS and you kind of assume that role. You assume that you are that role and then start getting into AWS services. Now, the first thing is you need to understand how IAM works into AWS, whether you're connected with LDAP or you've just created your own guest user, whatever it is. All right, so first thing is IAM role or IAM user. The second one in the list is policies. Now, whatever you do is tied to the policy. Whatever policy have been attached to you, you'll be able to only do that kind of work. So if you're an admin, so AWS has got more than hundreds of by default policies, but either you can use them by default policies or you can create your own in the JSON and attach with the user which you have created or attach it with the role. So policy gets attached to the role and that role can perform whatever has been mentioned into that policy. What was the first thing? First thing was IAM roles and IAM user. The second one is the policy which gets attached to the user or the role. All right, so the first half was about authentication and authorization. You've got your user, you've got your roles, and you've got your policy which gets attached to your role. All right, the second service which is highly used, and if you're a DevOps engineer, aspiring DevOps engineer in AWS, you got to understand this particular resource pretty well, which is S3 bucket. Now, whether you are working as a DevOps, data engineer, SRE, anything, S3 is the simplest thing you can get started. S3 is like simple storage wherein you keep your data, unstructured data, like could be files, could be audios, could be CSVs, could be images, could be anything, any type of data, unstructured data you want to dump. S3 would be the one which you would like to learn how versioning works, how encryption works, how public access to this bucket works. All of these contents, all of these concepts you need to learn. So the second one is S3. And 99.9% I'm pretty sure that any project you're working on, S3 you would need definitely. So make sure you learn S3. The first one was user role. Second one is policy. Third one, what we have learned is about the S3. What is the next? Once you have gotten with these basic, by the way, with S3 you will need the roles and policy, because if you don't have the policy attached with your role, you won't be able to perform anything on S3 bucket, because you got to have that policy attached to the S3 bucket, attached to the role rather, so that you can start performing any of the crude operation, create, read, update, delete performance on your S3 bucket. All right, so this was about 3 services. Now you're working as a DevOps engineer or a developer, you got to make sure that you want to build an application and you're going to deploy as well, right? So how do you do that? You use either one of these services, Elastic Container Service or Elastic Kubernetes. So fourth one is ECS, Elastic Container Service. or your Elastic Kubernetes service. You've got ECS, you've got Elastic Kubernetes service. So you've got your application, either you could, both are like container world. So if your application is containerized, doesn't matter, it's .NET, Java, Node.js, React, whatever application you've got, you could deploy it either on ECS, Elastic Container Registry, which is serverless. You don't have to manage any virtual machines, any nodes, any storage, nothing. And on the other hand, you've got Elastic Kubernetes service. You could deploy this application, the Node or .NET, whatever application, either on ECS or on Kubernetes service. So you got to understand the fourth one is ECS or Elastic Kubernetes. The only difference is both deployed as a container, but ECS is serverless. You don't care about nodes and all. With Kubernetes cluster, you got to be taking care of the nodes. You've got to be taking care of persistent volume, make sure you upgrade them properly, and there's a lot of learning curve involved in. This video is not about learning Kubernetes, but the fifth one, which is important one, which is Elastic Kubernetes service. Now, in order to deploy it onto any of these services, whether it's ECS or EKS, you'll need something called as ECR, Elastic Container Registry. Where will you keep your images? There has to be some place where these containers would be deployed, right? So they has to be coming from some sort of ECR. So either you could use Docker Hub, but since we're talking about AWS, you've got to be deploying into ECR, Elastic Container Registry. So all of your images sits into ECR, and from this ECR, your ECS and your EKS both can fetch these images and start deploying them as a container. All right, so I've kind of tried to condense down what you really need to get started with AWS. If you cover these 6 services, what are them? First one is the authorization, authentication, IAM, role. The second one is the policy. The third one is the S3 bucket. The fourth one is ECS. The fifth one is EKS. And the final one, the sixth one, is ECR. If you learn these concepts, these resources, you kind of covered most of the things which you need to get started as a DevOps engineer into AWS world. I hope this was super informative. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.